It won't come as a surprise when I tell you I'm a nerd. Combine that with autistic hyperfixations, and you get periodic obsessions with random computer games and weird subjects. So I figured I might as well make a diorama about it. I'm a big fan of management sims and hard moral choices in games, so when I saw War Hospital was coming out, I got a little bit obsessed. I was going to buy it on the day it was released, play it through for a whole day, and then turn all of that rampant energy into crafting. The first time I booted up, I was humming. Then my computer started chattering to itself. Turns out my old laptop doesn't actually like new games, and it stuttered the whole way through. I guess I'll just have to wait till I get my desktop back. These little soldiers were my first project on my new 3D printer. I have big plans for it that involve learning to use Blender, but for now I'm still learning the basics. I started by airbrushing black primer onto the figures. Badly. I don't know how much was user error and how much was the cheap nail art airbrush, but it was good enough that I didn't bother with a second coat. I also couldn't figure out how to take it apart to clean it, so that's something to work on. I made the beginnings of the casualty receiving centre by sticking a sheet of foam to some basswood to keep it sturdy. Then building the basic shape from foam that protected my printer in shipping. I could probably have done with making sure all my angles were square, but I didn't. I tested some different adhesives on foam offcuts, but that was boring and the tape was right there. I'm learning that anything that requires waiting is a bad idea. It lets the ADHD get its claws in, and the next thing you know I'm watching YouTube and making soup. I used 2 different sizes of lolly sticks to do the roof and the walls, sticking them on with double-sided tape and builder's glue. It was cheap and little. I cut the wood with clippers I got in a set of jewellery making supplies. They made a mess and ripped more than cut, but for a wartime shack it worked. While the building was setting, I tried to plan out the base. I didn't really know how I was going to do it, but I tried to lay out a guide in the foam with a stylus. I cut off the glue splurge once it had dried and scratched the wood to make it look a bit more weathered and cover up where I'd made a mess. I wish I'd had the common sense to start building from the bottom as well, but this is my first time, so I'm not feeling too bad. I just added extra bits to all the overhangs so it fit better. I cut a recess for the door in the porch so it would look deeper, and then added wood around it and a window frame. Then I filled both with filler and painted it black. I forgot how open to the air the building is in the game, because I wasn't working from a picture. And by this point I wasn't going back and changing things. Live and learn. I painted the whole shack with a dark wash of black which soaked into the wood grain, then patches of different browns to leave it a bit more variegated. I don't know if that ended up having an effect, but at least it was starting to look more like a building and less like a kid's toy. I added another layer of black to bring it all down and get that depressing wartime feeling. All that paint was showing off the grain of the wood, but I added a layer of watered down PVA so the rest would settle evenly. While that was drying, I started painting the people. I had a pretty good idea of what the uniforms were going to look like, just mixtures of brown and green, but I could have probably done with a more pigmented paint and a few more layers. I knew they were going to look pretty bad, no matter what I did, so I didn't put as much care into it as I should have. I ended up not using the officer because his cane broke off and it took his hand with it. I was a bit confused by the guy who's sitting down. I couldn't figure out if the cloth on his head was a bandage or a turban, but it made it easier to paint him if I assumed it was an injury, and he got the same flesh tone as his friends. The next step was the courtyard. I've seen other model makers on YouTube use terrain paste to create realistic ground cover, but for some reason I was convinced I could sculpt it to look like a tiled floor. Mostly I just ended up with a mess and a bit more knowledge. It took quite a while to pick the whole thing off so I could start again. I cut 3 levels of step from more craft foam and stuck them down with double-sided tape. In the original, the floor moves from being the same level as the top to the bottom in a slope, and if I'd been thinking things through, I would have just done that with more foam. But out came the filler, and I tried to make it look good that way. I smoothed over all the foam to try and give it a better surface for painting and gluing, and then stuck down foam offcuts to raise up the building. I really shouldn't have bothered with all this, but it's another lesson in choosing the right way to build. When I realised how long it was going to take to build up the slope with filler, I just started stuffing all my bigger scraps in there. I imagine real builders used to work the same way. Concreting a patio on the cheap? Just squish this rolled up rug under there and don't ask too many questions, there's a lad. To get the hundreds of tiles looking accurate, I just cut hundreds of tiles out of cardboard, doing some 1 centimetre square and some 1/2 centimetre square. This bit I kind of loved. Just settling in with one thing to do and working on it till it's done, then coming out of a trance 4 hours later with a crick in your neck, desperately needing the loo. This is what artistic crafting truly is. It's going to be harder to carve out time to get lost in a project in the future, because I'm going back to work. I'm searching for a job in warehousing because it's the only thing I'm qualified for, but there's not much going in the post-Christmas lull. I've had to leave my last 3 jobs because of struggles with mental health, and things haven't really got better on that front. It's easy to pass as coping because I've got low support needs, and I can mask really well. But that takes energy and the tank eventually runs dry. I used to be able to cope when I worked somewhere I could wear ear defenders all day, but everything is going towards voice commands, and I'm like a whippet at a fireworks show if there's too much noise around. Just another excuse to try and learn Blender and start making models that I can print and get people interested in. With the tiling nearly done, I could see the finish line. I just had to cut up bits to fill in a few gaps and then dump a layer of watered down glue all over everything. If I was smart, I would have painted with the airbrush, but I wasn't, so I didn't. I just covered everything in a black wash and then went round all the little cracks that didn't get coloured in with a tiny brush. It all looked pretty good in the end, but choices were made. I tried to add a light grey wash, but a poor choice in brush left the whole thing looking streaky. There wasn't a whole lot of variation in the colours, so I went hunting around for a large, stiff paintbrush for white highlights to try and save what I had. I think it worked. It looks more like in the game, misty and cold, but I didn't add any mist to anything else and I'm not going to be starting now. As a final touch, I cut a piece of white cotton, soaked it in watered-down PVA, and draped it over the roof to be our Red Cross flag. In the end, it's a decent first project. I didn't know what I was doing, and you can maybe tell. But physical failure is worth a lot more than dreams of perfect projects that never get made. I might start from a kit next time, or just try to make one aspect to a higher skill level. Either way, I'll be back. If you liked watching this, how about a like? And if you want to see the next one, you can subscribe!